The Stage Door Show, celebrating the independent artist. With your host, Dave Hondel.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Stage Door Show. I'm Dave Hondel. Tonight, I'm honored to have with me a SAG Award nominee who's been seen in over 140 projects from stage, television to the big screen. He's an acclaimed actor and producer that we're lucky to have on the show, so please welcome Stelio Savante. Stelio, thanks for being with us.
Hey, Dave, thank you. Thank you and Stage Door for having me. It's an honor to be on your show.
Well, we're honored for sure. And, before we get started on some of your projects that you're working on right now, one of the things that I've noticed from watching a lot of your work is how versatile you are. There's a lot of roles that you played, either, bad guys or, good guys, but you're able to adjust your accent depending on what the role is, but you do it so seamlessly and so flawlessly. Some people might not even believe that you're from South Africa because you're able to do like a New York mob accent. You're able to do a Russian accent. So how did you learn to do that? And has that versatility allowed you to get some of these roles that you've had over the years?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think a lot of that has to do with my youth. I grew up in South Africa, having to speak a lot of languages simultaneously. And honestly, we did not get television until 1978, which meant a lot of time spent listening to radio. And one of my, we're going into nerd mode here, but one of my great hobbies was listening to shortwave radio.
Nice.
I used to get a kick out of being able to pick up kind of radio stations from different countries. And back then, it wasn't digital with a number. It was the old dial-up where
Sure.
This is exciting. I'm listening to the Voice of America, but I also have Deutsche Welle from Germany and the BBC. Speaking those accents and learning those languages is one part of it for sure. But a role encompasses much more than the accent, which sometimes is really the polish or the finishing touch on a role. I've lived a very active life, over the course of, I'm going to be 55 in April. I've lived on 4 different continents, lived and worked in many different countries. I grew up kind of in, I would call it a white collar neighborhood, but really my parents were immigrants, so we were blue collar. And having lived there, then in Europe for a couple of months when I was young, then in the U.S., especially New York City, you learn so much from life, the cultures, the environments, the neighborhoods that you live in. And ultimately, all you're doing really is mimicking your father's accent or using certain attributes that certain people in your life used early on because they ring true. And at that point, they become part of who you are. That being said, with New York, I lived there longer than I have anywhere else in my life. So really, it took on its own natural progression. And yes, on the video game side, that has been very rewarding for me, from all of the Call of Duties to several other video games that I've been in. They will often seek me out because they know there's a certain role type or a certain vocal type, and specifically a certain accent that they can trust somebody with. But it's only been embraced, I'd say, the last 10 years. I started out in the 90s. I'm in my 4th decade doing this now in the 2020s. But early on, being ethnic, having a different accent, they were so busy watching that they weren't watching the work. Now it's celebrated. Now ethnicity, diversity is more openly embraced. So that was a liability, and it's actually become an asset.
I want to get into your process on how you act in front of a TV camera versus on stage. Obviously, when you're on stage, you're acting to the back row, and on TV, you're so subtle. When you have to have those facial expressions, and your facial expressions are so amazing that you can do something so subtle, but it makes such a difference. So tell our actors out there that are listening, the importance of adjusting your mindset from the stage to TV to even film, and how you have to adjust your facial expressions and bring it down a little bit, obviously, for TV. So talk about that.
Yeah, and thank you for those kind words. And I would actually add gaming into the mix, because I've had so much voiceover work over the years. not just in video games, but in animated series, in narration, in documentaries. And that is a completely specified kind of specialist lane as well. Yeah, I think to summarize it, one has to go back and look at the difference, not just in performance, but really in process. Theater is where I started, and theater is performed chronologically. It will always go from beginning to end. Film, television rarely ever shoots that way. There are some directors who prefer to work that way. Sometimes it exacerbates their process, so it really depends on the format and the medium. Video games, you could be brought in for 20 to 30 sessions over the course of a year. It will really depend how far along, if you're just voice, how far along they are with their mocap before they come in and use you. Um, Stage is really, and many actors have said this, it's much more of a pure actor's medium because you have control of, whereas in film, they're going to edit you, there will be coverage on other actors. The coverage might be on you three-quarter, it might not necessarily be close up or tight. Theater, for that reason, is a much more pure actor's medium. The reason I prefer film, and it goes into process and how different it is that it's much more natural. I don't speak to you the way I would be when I'm performing in front of a 2,000 seat theater
Sure.
because you're playing to the audience as you rightfully said. I also feel it's a much more natural medium because it's much more collaborative. You do have the cinematographer and you do have to have an understanding and eventually a mastery of camera if you want to have longevity in the industry. That means understanding not only coverage but knowing what lenses you're on, because your performance on a close-up is not, and if you're on a 75 or 100 millimeter lens, it's going to be very different than if you're on a medium, let's say a 35 or a 50, than if you're on a very wide shot, a 15 or a 17 millimeter lens, because you want to be able to save your truth and your honesty and your moments for your close-ups. You don't want to waste them all, give them all away on coverage that isn't necessarily going to have as much time on it. Simultaneously, you want to be able to feed the other actor in the scene seven different ways of helping him get to where he needs to be so that it keeps him organic and in the moment and working truthfully. And I think the process itself, if you have a technique that you work on, there are many different ways to get to the end point. But ultimately, with theater, it is much more dialogue driven. It is much more formatted and restricted. Um, Television, especially the golden era of television that we're in, is akin to film. It is more similar, but process and preparation wise, you have to be much more of a minimalist and understand the difference. And the difference is not just the other actor or actors in the scene, it is without a doubt camera. Video games, animation, and voice, you really have to be able to understand who your audience is and exude every emotion, minimalist or not, through your voice, because they don't have, unless it is mocap or um, captured on camera, they don't have the ability to see your face, to see your emotions, and sometimes your voicing characters going off of their physicality when the mocap's been done in advance. So it's very specific, and it takes years, honestly, of being um, a good listener and understanding everything that is expected of a character in the video game world, what you need to come prepared with and be in the moment with, so that when that first, let's say it's a first person video game, when that person picks up that remote control and they're using your controller, playing your character, they know that if it's Call of Duty, your character's taking shots, he's been killed. Okay, it feels different to be stabbed by a knife than it does to be shot or hit by a baseball bat or blown
Right.
up. you have to come to the table being able to portray every one of those, hopefully never in real life having been in any one of those situations.
People can tell if you're not acting. I mean, if you're not doing the physical activity. I mean, so in some respects, you almost have to physically act, correct?
Most certainly, that's what I meant when I said the mocap's brought to you, but you have to make it all alive
Sure,
yourself, because it's not just the sound effects and emotion. You are a living, breathing, four-dimensional character,
sure.
and you have to be able to bring that to the character. And if you're not, even in auditions, it's a vexation to the process, because they want to feel that they are there with you.
Yeah,
Getting back to theater for one sec, the other thing I will say is that with theater, there isn't as much leeway for improvisation. Um, you are almost 100% committed to the script, and there has to be a discipline, especially if you're doing a low contract show that's going to run for a minimum of 6 weeks, sometimes many, many months. You have to be adept enough at finding different ways to keep it fresh while knowing you cannot at any single point in time detract. You cannot change from what is scripted.
right.
Film is the friendliest to that process, which is why I find it the most collaborative. It's by far my favorite medium.
Sure.
It also transports. Film brings all of the other arts together, from screenwriting all the way to, hair, makeup, music, projection. Then you all get to sit together around and watch it in a theater with hundreds of people you don't know. Of course, that's changed with streaming, but process-wise and performance-wise, even if it isn't a comedy, sometimes after you've done a clean take, which is scripted, the director will often say, we have the clean one, give me something I haven't seen, or you could request it. Television, it really depends on how formatted and strict it is. We're very fortunate in the era of television that we're in that a lot of episodics now on the great streaming platforms are shot a lot more like film. And we have the gift of digital, which is far less expensive than 35 millimeter. And because of that, you are able to give, 3, 4 takes and mix it up a little bit. But dialogue-wise, television, you are restricted. If it's a 1 hour show, let's say it's prime time, just went through this and I had so much fun working on SWAT, but it is exactly what is written. You're paid to say what they put on the page. That's what they're bringing you in for. Of course, you have to make it alive. And then I think having an idea in all four mediums, how you're going to get there. In television, you're almost always playing to the edit or for the edit. And it takes a minute to learn what that is, what it even means. In film, you're not always playing to the edit. They will, more often than not, allow you the benefit and the privilege of setting your own marks. Cinematography will show me exactly how you see the scene. The director will be, if they're confident and astute enough in their craft, allow you to set your own marks. Camera will capture what you're doing. In television, your marks are set for you. They have a certain amount of hours in their day, and they'll have to get it done.
Sure.
So again, just my medium, and this is very subjective. A lot of purists are theater is their first love. It used to be mine. I became bored with it because I felt that it was too vocal.
Sure.
It was just too much speaking, and it didn't move beyond that, and it was limited in that. You look at Netflix now, series are seen by 50 to 100 million people. Films are seen that way. I mean, theater does not have that ability at all.
Yeah. And there was a scene in Making of the Mob. There was a scene where you had a gun to some guy's head in the scene, and you were barely above a whisper. And that scene was so powerful. And I've watched it over and over and over again because I was so impressed by the powerful nature of the scene, but you were barely above a whisper, but you were able to get the point across. And it just was like, kudos on that, because that was amazing. I don't know if that was in the script like that or if that was a choice by yourself, but again, just amazing work.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I cannot take a minute of credit for that. I I always request conversations with my directors before we film. 99% of the time, you get them. You listen to their vision, you discuss what you feel you're bringing to it. But I always like to understand the style of it. And I grew up really adoring the minimalist eras of film, the 60s and 70s, the foreign film eras where in the case of French New Wave and Italian neorealism, it wasn't just talk, talk, talk. The cinematography was so brilliant. It would set up conflict and tension. It was framed really brilliantly, and the performances were akin to that. In so much of today's world, they just follow the dialogue, and I'm probably dating myself, but it's just boring.
Yeah.
With that character, I had a conversation with John Ealer, and I felt that if Joe the Boss Masseria raised his voice, he would actually lose his power, that he would upstage himself, that the way for him to go to other characters and stay completely in control was to be cool, calm, and collected,
Yeah.
and that it would actually needle other characters if he was barely above a whisper, because that to me is much more terrifying than a guy that screams who's already lost. You don't
100%.
know
Yeah.
with somebody who's whispering and kind of that rage is boiling under the collar but never fully comes out. Until it does, you don't know what to expect next. And it's exciting for camera and the audience, but it's also great for the other actor in the scene. I love working off of actors like that, because when you don't know what they're going to do next, and I'm not speaking dialogue now, I'm talking about behavior and truth and being real and in the moment. What's coming out of you as your reaction is so much more honest.
Yeah. The whole thing about it is being under control, and that character was certainly under control, as it had to be. The other thing is, there's a lot of true to life type projects that you've been involved in, like Colors of Heaven, and Pursuit of Freedom. There's a lot of different, like I said, based on true stories. Do you feel like an extra sense of responsibility, I guess, to make sure that the story is told true to the events? And as an actor, that would be, to me, it would be a lot of sense of responsibility there.
There's so much weight that comes with that, and I appreciate you being astute in doing your homework. I've just finished, I think, 5 back-to-back true stories. They all couldn't be more different from each other. I will I will refer to 2 of them. There's a film I'm in called Stay Fort, which is
Yep.
based on the true life story of 3 hostages
Recently.
that
Yep.
escaped from Hamas. Yes,
Correct.
October 7th. And these projects found me. I mean, these incredible casting director Gabrielle Almagor reached out to me and said, "We're very interested in you playing the head of Hamas." And that did not sit well with me. I had to pray about it. I had to think about it, because there are consequences for playing those kind of roles. The added extra layer was that I'd have to learn to speak Arabic for the part. Now, I have the ear for different languages. I speak many of them, but none of them are anywhere near close to Arabic. It's simultaneously very melodic and poetic, but incredibly harsh and guttural. And I'm so grateful for the translator and kind of somebody helped me with the dialect on set, because Gazans speak a very specific kind of Arabic. But there was, for me, I beg your pardon, so much responsibility um, to play into that man's need, who is all of these characters are based not only on real people, but there are consequences for what they did, and there are certain philosophies and needs for what they have. Likewise, in a film I did called Sarah's Oil, based on the true life story of the United States' first black teenage millionaire, a wonderful young lady named Sarah Rector. And I come in there playing, and I was given a little artistic license, but a character that has moved to Oklahoma for the oil boom, the Oklahoma rush, oil rush, and wanted to. I had great conversations with an incredible director I've worked with before, Cyrus Naraste. He's written for everybody from Oliver Stone to Steven Spielberg, who've produced his work. And there does come that sense of weight and responsibility, because you need to be able to hope that you are giving that character a sense of honesty, as you do with all characters, but keeping in mind there are consequences for what many of these people did. I'll even add a third, a film called Hazel that I finished recently, which is based on the true life story of Hazel Minor, one of North Dakota's worst snowstorms, and she gets caught up in it and has to make a decision on, saving her young siblings' lives. I play her father, and our director did an incredible amount of research and backstory on it. They even brought some of the surviving family members on it, and I wanted to learn as much as I could about her father. I will say the one thing in playing true life characters is you have to be careful to not mimic. We don't have control of how we look, and sometimes budget will determine what goes into it, and we'll never look exactly 100% the way that person will. And sometimes it's good to keep that space. There's nothing wrong with that. Otherwise, all you are doing is basically being a parody.
Right.
And I think that line will always have, there's no safety in there for that. If it's a person that's extremely well known, as there was with Joe Joe the Masseria, Joe the Boss Masseria, it was
Right.
a very fine line. Even being a docudrama, the amount of research and discipline that is required, to me, that's fun part of the process, preparation. I love it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I always wanted to ask somebody with your experience that question, because I know true to life events, sometimes it's like you said, you can't always 100% get come across as that person. But again, I like the decision to not be like that, but still be true to the event itself, and be I guess enough of that person that people understand what that person's sensibilities are, and that type of thing. So I think it's a great answer.
Absolutely. I'll even add to that because he's a friend. I worked with him. Matt Dillon is playing Marlon Brando in a new
Oh,
film that's coming out about Maria's life, the actress who was actually in Last Tango. And I
okay.
was so impressed in just seeing the trailer, and I forgot to text him, but he didn't go for an over the top parody because
Sure.
Marlon wasn't just an actor. Marlon was a cultural phenomenon,
Right.
even yet today. And because of that, there are many imitators. People are brilliant. They can do just tremendous impressions of him, specifically playing the Godfather, and that stuck with him forever.
Right.
Matt did not make that choice. It's a very nuanced, natural performance. He's speaking French in the role. He is doing Marlon's accent as he would, but it's not over the top. It's minimalist and it's believable and it's so much more interesting. Marlon did Marlon. We don't need to see somebody else
Sure.
play the
That's right.
Godfather.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you. Angel Studios, you did a project called Between Borders, and I see your background is Between Borders, so I want to make sure that our listeners know about that film. So why don't you talk about that just briefly?
I absolutely will. Angel's been good for me, starting with The Chosen, which I recur on, and Between Borders was one of the richest opportunities I've had for a project. We filmed that in Romania last year. It started streaming on Angel about, I think, 3 weeks ago, maybe a little bit more than that, based on the true life story of these Armenians who were persecuted not for their faith. They didn't have any faith. They were atheist and communist, and had a lot of struggles in Azerbaijan and in Russia, and not an exception to the rule, really par for the course, because um, I have many Armenians that I've met over the years, a lot that I'm friends with. So this situation wasn't something we've never heard before. But then getting to know the family, and I had the privilege of knowing the Petrosians because I'd done a previous project with them, hearing and knowing their story and what they'd been through was inspiring. It was encouraging. I understood and felt a lot of it personally, being an immigrant myself. I did not have the easiest time with immigration when I first came here, but also not feeling entitled, knowing what a privilege and an honor it is to be and to call yourself an American. Um, Spending time with them, and specifically the role, which is based on somebody I know well, Lonnie was a lay missionary that worked over in that part of the country that kind of planted the church that these characters, that Violetta and her husband Ivan, Ivan, got to know and understand that for the first time in their lives, they had an opportunity to make a choice of their own, freedom. And slowly but surely they immigrate. I mean, I can't give too much away,
Sure. Right.
but spending time with Lonnie, knowing his heart, knowing what the certain what his intentions were, what was important to him, what he was like, and then the writer who I've worked with before, writer director, very talented young man by the name of Mark Freiberger, said, "Listen, let's tweak a little bit of this and actually make it personal to some of your own story and see what happens on set." And I appreciated that so much because I was given the trust. You know, the great directors trust you. They don't interfere. They don't try to direct you. And that shows confidence because it means they're also trusting their choice in casting you the same way they trust their choice in their cinematographer and their set design, their art designer, their art director. So it was tremendous to have the opportunity to also go and film in Romania, which while doubling for Azerbaijan and Russia also had a sense of a journey, a sense of history, a sense of gravitas rooted in something that didn't come about easily. They're a former Eastern Bloc country and came out of communism. And I'm fascinated with history, fascinated with it. So being able to be on sets in cobblestone streets that really you can't recreate here as hard as you try
Right.
as an actor when you are on set, when you're in an environment, when it's something that's real and it has fabric to it and it's dirty, and I don't necessarily mean physically, I mean struggle. That only helps the process, and it's very rewarding. And it doesn't take a sleuth to figure out that, you know, if you're going to film in a location where the incentives are better and know the people whose stories they're based on, and the fabric of that on set makes your process easier, you're going to want to say yes and take the role, which I did. And I would also like to acknowledge Elizabeth Tavish, who plays Mary on The Chosen. Her work and her portrayal of Violetta is sublime. She captured her hearts, her wants, her needs, but also what she struggled with, her vulnerability. And that elicits a response from audience. You're invested in that because you know that that person is fragile and struggles and has insecurities the way we all do. I'm very proud of that film, and it is available both on Angel Studios streaming on their platform, and I believe for rent and purchase on Amazon.
That's amazing. Everybody, all my listeners, make sure you check that out. We talked about, The Chosen. You played Moses on The Chosen. And
Yes.
I know you're a man of faith. And one of the things I wanted to ask you is, how do you navigate that in Hollywood? Because I think, for people that aren't in the business, I think there's an air of, that there's a lot of bad things that go on in Hollywood, unfortunately, and how do you change that persona, I guess, of Hollywood, or what can you do in your role, I guess, as an actor producer to kind of shine a brighter light on Hollywood, I guess, if that makes sense.
It's a very complex matter because for the longest time, Christians and faith-based films were horrendous. They were just completely vacuous of any artistic integrity whatsoever. But they had a strong message. And the flip side of that coin is, for decades, artistically integrous, critically acclaimed projects were brilliantly executed with exceptional screenplays and performances that form cinematic landscape, but their messages were spiritually bankrupt. So I am a person of Christian faith specifically, and being part of something like The Chosen for me was very, very powerful. I was never originally meant to have that role, supposed to have a different part, and I was in a very difficult place because it kept delaying due to rain in Texas in the first season of The Chosen, and it got closer and closer to my dates on Infidel, an action thriller I shot in Jordan in the Middle East with Jim Caviezel. And eventually my reps and I called Dallas personally first, the creator of The Chosen. And I said, I'm so sorry. I'm literally heartbroken. I want to be part of the show because I love what you're doing. I think it's changed the game
Yeah.
completely for these kind of projects. You're not just making films for the Sea of Galilee anymore. This is for all of the oceans of the world, but I'm not available. He said, don't worry, we'll find something else. And I've spoken about this before, but while we were there, my family came over. We went and visited Petra, which is all over the Bible. We went to Wadi Rum. We went to the Holy Land. We went to Gethsemane and where the Lord was baptized at Al Maqdes in Jordan. We also went to Mount Nebo, where Moses is buried. And I
Wow.
got very emotional because I know Moses' journey. For me personally, my mother's a Messianic Jew, so she believes in Jesus. She's a Christian, in other words, but still practices the old traditions. My grandfather survived the Holocaust. My faith is brought to me by Jewish believers. The first Christians were Jews. And my Savior is a Jew. And my faith and my Bible is written by Jewish men and
Right.
women. So we get up to Mount Nebo, and I remembered from knowing scripture that the very last thing Moses saw was the Holy Land. He wasn't allowed to enter because he sinned. He made an error, as we all do. But what was fascinating to me was you looked out into the Holy Land and you could see Israel, and it was flourishing and it was green. And I was on this gorgeous brown rock, which I would describe as Mars, which is why Jordan, such a beautiful country, has doubled for Mars in The Martian and in Star Wars and in Dune. It doubles for other planets. But I felt for him because I knew his sin had hurt him, but I celebrated emotionally because he knew with peace in his heart that the Lord kept his promise. There's the Holy Land. Your people are now free. It's their land. Yet we were standing under this huge hole and snake, which is also from the Bible. And in his museum, the Museum of Moses, and knowing his journey, and it was very personal to me. I celebrated it with my family. I come back 3 months later. Dallas reaches out and he says, I have a pretty iconic role. I'd really prefer you didn't say no. I'm sending you the script. I go, Dallas, you can't say that without not telling me what the role is. What is it? I read the script and it's Moses, and it's the
Wow.
scene with the snake and the pole that I've just come from 3 months prior, and
Meant to
being
be.
part of the show.
Yeah.
It's incredible. I mean, and the wonderful thing that's happened with The Chosen is that there are a lot of countries whose media is controlled by their government. North Korea, China,
Yeah.
Russia, Iran, where Christianity is growing incredibly fast, but television is controlled. Yet the Chosen premiered on an app, and here we are during the pandemic with people all over the world being able to download The Chosen that their government can control and it cannot censor because it's an app. And we start hearing from people all over the world that have never even heard the words Jesus Christ before. And
Yeah.
they're fascinated. They have hope. They're sitting around, their app, watching their entire family, watching the show. Now it's become this massive series whose numbers have surpassed Game of Thrones. They just had their season 5 celebration premiere in Times Square, all over billboards, with Annie Leibovitz, probably the greatest photographer of all time, or contemporary, doing these stupendously magnificent photos of the lead characters of The Chosen. And you know, there are 7 seasons of this, so I'm excited for other reasons than the obvious.
Yeah.
But being part of that has been good to me because often what happens as a Christian in the industry we're in is so much of my career has not been in faith based at all. If you look at the plays, video games, films, and series I've done, there are some, but it's not a big percentage. And that means that sometimes discernment has not been great. I've taken roles in genre I had no right being in, but work begets work. You have to provide for your family.
Right.
And now, you look back the last 10, 15 years, you're able to produce and be part of a content that does give people a message of hope. You're able to turn projects down you want no part of, but you're able to bring something additional. And that doesn't just mean on camera. It means when you're on set and you see somebody struggling, or you're having lunch with someone and they open up and they need something uplifting, or they need somebody to pour into their life and invest in them and encourage them and inspire them and know that they are seen and they are heard and there is a purpose for their life. Um, what more could you ask for? That's a great calling and responsibility. I mean, I was at a men's prayer breakfast at my church this morning. Gosh, I came out of there so reinvigorated, because there's many things I struggle with as a highly flawed person, but you're not alone. You have brothers and sisters that care about you, and now they're in our industry. So
Yeah, that's amazing. I love how you said that, because that's one thing that I'm encouraged to see shows like The Chosen and different productions like that. I used to go to my grandparents used to take me to the Passion Play. We grew up in Minnesota, so we used to go to South Dakota, the Black Hills. They used to do a Passion Play, and every time we went to the Passion Play, and I kid you not, if it was raining, if it was about to rain, the show was about to start and the clouds just went away. It was, every time that happened, it was like it was meant to be. It was I can't even, and I was a kid, I still remember that to this day, how the weather just became beautiful right before the show started. It was all outdoors. So again, just great to hear that from you.
and that's so great hearing that
Yeah.
from you, that you had that experience as a
Yeah.
child, because that will sometimes bring in nostalgia from things that meant something to us at childhood. But oh yeah, I filmed in Minnesota. Oh yeah, I filmed in the Black Hills, and I filmed both in Minnesota and also in both the Dakotas. I love
Really?
that part of the world. Oh
Okay.
yeah, I just finished another in fact, Hazel, which I told you about, that we
Yeah.
filmed in North
North
Dakota.
Dakota.
A
Yeah.
lot of yeah, most of our cast and crew were from there. And then I did a comedy for Lionsgate a couple of years back with Frank Langella and Bobby Cannavale, that we,
Yeah.
in fact, Minnesota doubled gosh, for Long Island, for the Hamptons. It doubled for the
Really?
Hamptons.
Oh, I didn't
Yep,
know that.
yep,
Okay.
yeah. And my church also, Shepherd Church, does a passion play that Great American Pure Flix broadcasts every year. And knowing you had that experience as a child, you're
Yeah.
lucky. That's
Yeah. It's
great.
amazing. Yeah, just amazing. But I want to transition into this because I have a couple questions left for you before we're done. But one of the questions that I had is all the sets that you've been on. I mean, you've been on, big studio sets. You've been on television. You've been on, independent production sets. And, obviously every set is a little bit different, but you have a crew when you have a cast and you have directors and so forth. But talk to our listeners about the importance of how you treat people on set, as an actor or anybody. You might have a grip, you might have an engineer, you might have somebody that's doing the electricity, whoever that might be. But talk about the importance of treating people with respect and professionalism when you're working out there.
Yeah, sure. After uh, 2 decades of working in New York as an actor, I moved out to LA, and I heard a very funny rumor. And the rumor was the quickest way to get an actor to complain in Los Angeles is to give them a job. And I thought, that's pathetic. That's ridiculous. It's not true. My very first day on Ugly Betty, on my recurring role, which is what brought us out to Los Angeles,
Yep.
the guy I have two scenes with is literally outside his double banger, his trailer, if you will, measuring it. His heart was completely in the wrong place. And I try to just give him a little bit of wisdom, which is what matters is what you're putting on camera. Don't worry about the rest. The size of your trailer is irrelevant. You treat everybody with respect. You are all there to bring a vision together. You're not out there to be somebody's position coach on a football team and tell them their job. And you're not out there to be a doormat. You're all links on a chain working together. So at the end of every day, I will always thank my cinematographer, my director, the other actors in the scene with me. And I think actors should actually learn a little bit about the other departments in film and television to understand those artists, whether it's your focus puller or hair and makeup, they're artists too, and they have a personal sense of responsibility and passion for what they do. So appreciate it and don't ever take it for granted, because there are hundreds of thousands of actors that would step into that part and that role in a heartbeat.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's one of the things that I think no matter what industry you're in, it could be the receptionist, it could at the casting agency, it could be somebody you never know who it's not even about who they might be someday. They might be the casting director, but it's just being a good human being. And that's one of the things that I like to tell my listeners, young listeners especially, for advice. If you're going to be going into this industry, you're gonna work a lot longer if you're easy to work with. Right.
You
Right.
100% are. And having been on the other side of that, you make a great point. So often, as producer, you will have meetings with casting. You will let them know who you want them to make your offers to. And more often than not, there will be certain names that come up that are incredibly talented, whose work we know. Casting director will say, life's too short. I'm not going to work with that person. Too difficult, or always high, or always unprepared, or talks to the crew badly, or tells the director how to direct.
Yeah.
And you become aware of so many things you didn't realize before. A million miracles have to fall into place for any project to film. Why would you show up and be difficult? There's nothing wrong with having creative conversations and not challenging a role, but speaking with what you feel helps make it better. That's why they hire you. They don't hire you to be a puppet. So you should seek that. But that's not the same as being difficult and cocky and being an a-hole. And unfortunately, there's almost always one on every set. I mean, I've
Yeah.
just been shocked over the years. And sometimes it's an American thing, in the rest of the world, because I've been blessed to film internationally a lot. They don't put the actor on as much of a pedestal as they do here. The Los Angeles actor is a very unique breed to where they look down on others. I understand wanting to have your lunch by yourself in your trailer, your piece, and your prep and a chance to chill. But when you're on set, talking down to other departments, and a lot of times I've seen it with A-listers, and it really, really gets under my skin. They don't know how good they have it. So, yeah, I from the other side of the table, and especially not just producing, but for actors starting out, know and understand that longevity is the greatest compliment you can have, but your work ethic will have a lot more to do with your longevity than your talent will.
Yeah, well said. I appreciate that. Before we go, Stelio, I just have one last question for you, and I ask everybody this at the end. But what do you want your legacy to be? What do you want to leave behind to your fans and to just everybody when it's all said and done?
I don't think much about legacy. The more time I spend in God's word, the less I realize I know and the more I have to learn about him. And I just want to be the best father and the best husband and the best Christian I can be. And my gift as a believer, my spiritual gift is the gift of exhortation or encouragement. So if I was able to pour into other people's lives and let them know that they're seen and heard and important, and that there's a very specific purpose for their life, that means more to anything than work, because the gift is not mine. It's been loaned to me. And if I don't do with it what is required, it'll be loaned to someone else and taken away from me. Nothing that I have, I can give any credit to myself for. Everything that is good in my life came from God, and everything that is bad or that I've made a mistake in my life is a lesson that has allowed me to lean on him and learn from him. So my approach is, legacies are for other people. Of course, Moses had a great legacy, so did Abraham. But the greatest legacy that has ever been made for any man that's ever walked the earth is what I lean into. So I'm more concerned with surrendering to that than having, my own.
I appreciate that. I love that. For all of our listeners out there, make sure you check out Stelio Savante. There's all kinds of stuff on online, but of course your movies, your TV work and stage work has just been amazing over the past 4 decades, and we appreciate what you've given us in the entertainment world and outside of that as well, with your faith and everything you talked about on the show today. So just thank you for your time, to the honor of your time to do the show, and you're always welcome back. And again, I appreciate it so much, Stelio. Thank you.
No, I appreciate it, and thank you, and thank you for being such a great listener. Because unfortunately, the way my brain works, I don't have the ability to answer a question concisely, and you haven't shut me up once. So thank you for having me. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Well, like I said, I can't wait to have you back at some point, and best of luck with your future projects, and can't wait to
Thank
see them
you.
come out.
Thank you. I appreciate that.